Hello everyone, before we get started, I just have a couple quick things to say. The first is I just want to explain the tier list. So this is a tier list for improving, mainly aimed at ranks for platinum and below, and we're going to talk about the champions that are most useful for doing that. So this is not so much a tier list for effectiveness and low elo, it's really the champs that are going to teach you the basic fundamentals, that are going to give you the tools in order to climb higher on the list. And obviously, as we go throughout the video, we'll give all our thoughts and explanations for that. And all that will be timestamped in the description below. I also want to really quickly say that I will be joining Coach Curtis's Mid Lane Academy as a coach, and I will be doing a couple sessions in there every week. So if you do want to get coached by me, you can check that out, and there will be a link in the description below. And on screen, you can see some of the features on the MLA website. And as you can see, it's really well done, and I think it's something that a lot of you would be very interested in. So again, there is a link for that in the description below. Otherwise, please enjoy the video and let me know what you guys think of the tier list.
All right, let's just kick it off with Malzahar, right? Simple champion, very basic kit. What's your intuition with Malzahar?
Yeah, so I think, Miles is definitely going to be on the higher end of things. I think the only thing that gives me pause about Malzahar is like, obviously when you are new to the game, it can be nice to play one of these champs that does just sort of play the game for you, right? In the sense that, it's going to make wave clearing easy, it simplifies your team fights and stuff like that. So it's good to allow you to learn the rest of the game. The only thing I maybe worry about Mal's is like it does kind of cheapen some fundamentals. Like for example, maybe farming is too easy in the sense that like, well, you don't have to think about that, and maybe going from a champ like Mal's, if you're trying to learn a different champ, might be hard. So for me, I think he's still really good. I'd probably put him as like a low S or a high A, I think.
As we go through this one, Shock, what we can do is we can reorganize them where the
Yeah,
left-hand side would be right the best.
Yeah.
Right? And then the right, the least, or like the lower end on that category. Yeah, just to riff off what you said, I kind of view Malzahar as kind of like the training wheels of mid.
Yeah.
Where, again, it is good for people that are relatively new to the game because it simplifies specifically farming, right? You don't really have to think all that much. But I think that for people that are like, let's say in gold or silver, you definitely can make that journey to platinum or whatever with it. But like you said, you kind of skip over a few little things.
Yeah.
So I view it as like a really good, if you're like level 30, you're in iron, you're in bronze. I think Malzahar's great to get a feel of how the flow of the game, I guess, goes. And also you free up a lot of your mental stack to think about things like trading or like your jungler or like getting to objectives, just like the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think that is a good point because, especially like some of those early things you're trying to learn, like ward timings and that, if you've got so much else to juggle at the same time, it can be pretty hard. But you're right, like Miles is a great answer for those people to begin with.
Yeah, we might come back to that one. I think Miles is a bit of an interesting one. Let's get to Ahri.
Okay.
Ahri.
Yeah, so Ahri, I'm kind of like in the same boat. Like on one hand, she does make it so that there's a lot of things you don't have to think about or are forgiven for, right? Like she's very mobile, she has a lot of sustain and stuff. For me, I don't think she quite makes it into the S tier because I think that she does just forgive you for too much. Like a lot of the time I do coach Ahri players or even play against Ahri players, and honestly, they are missing a lot of fundamentals, right? Like they won't play the lane that aggressively because they can survive by playing passively, or they won't ward properly because they can get away with it. So I think it's still good. Like it's not the most advanced champ, but I think it actually is almost too forgiving to be put in S tier. But it's still solid.
Ahri's interesting because I actually think people massively underestimate the difficulty of this champion.
Ooh, interesting. Okay.
I think Ahri is a lot harder than a lot of people will give credit for. So in the MLA, I actually didn't even have it as an approved champion for quite a long time.
Okay.
And the reason I didn't is because she's okay. So think about the way she fights, Shock. Like,
yeah,
she fights in a very unique way. Like when you think of like your Malzahar, right? It's very stock standard. It's like, okay, I know what my kit does. I have this damage over time ability. I have no mobility. I know I have a lot of damage, and I have this one R ability that I press it suppresses.
It does damage.
It does damage. Like the kit makes sense, and you can kind of intuitively understand what the strengths and weaknesses of the champ are and what you kind of want to be doing. The thing with Ahri that I've found, the challenge that I've faced coaching Ahri players is, yes, you're right. I think she can be forgiving in the sense that you have inbuilt mobility, so you can get away with maybe some poor threat assessment and things like that. But I've always found Ahri to be one of the harder champions in my program because fighting, it's like, do I dive? Do I peel? When do I go in? Because with Ahri, it's like you're a bit of a chameleon. You do a bit of everything. You can situationally dive the backline. You can peel back. You can kind of bait out abilities. There's like a lot there with the skirmishing that I think overwhelms a lot of people. So they get to that point where they're okay, and then they just can't really translate that well because they're a bit overwhelmed, or the game is decided by the skirmish and then they just not able to execute.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I've observed.
Okay, yeah, no, that's very interesting. I mean, I definitely see where you're coming from. Like, I think you're right. Like, there definitely is more skill to Ahri than people think. I'm still not sure about, like, like you mentioned, having the ability to do all those things and then being overwhelming. But I think the fact that she is, like, at least decent at all those things, mean, like, if you decide, like, maybe incorrectly to dive instead of peeling, it can still be useful, right? And I think just in terms of, like, actually winning games, even just like not dying, especially in low elo, because so many people are like shooting themselves in the foot the whole game, does go a long way. So yeah, no, I think I definitely agree with what you're saying. I think for me it would still be in the A tier, but maybe it's on the lower end of A if you think it has some difficulties that make it not as good.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I think we'll have to come back to Ahri as well because I think we'll have to see how she fits in relative to everything else.
That's true. Yeah.
Annie's a very interesting one, Chuck. So I've actually really changed my stance on Annie a lot over the years, actually. So I'll
you go first. Yeah.
I'll start with this one. So you think of like Annie as this, the OG kind of simple champion, right? LS, just pick Annie, that whole kind of spiel. And yes, it has that kind of Malzahar-esque vibe, right? Where it's like simple kit. You can pump out a lot of damage. You're always going to provide utility. Your last hitting, I guess, can be simplified, right? With just queuing last hits. But what I've found with Annie is that because the kit, okay, so there's two aspects of the kit that people don't gel with. Number one, it actually lacks wave clear. And champs like Ahri and Malz, having wave clear helps a lot. Just for simplifying your lane phase, because when you're able to clear waves, everything is more forgiving. Getting resets is more forgiving. Being able to get 10 fights is more forgiving. Just taking good trades in general is more forgiving because you can clear waves, then take good trades. Like when you're having to react to waves a lot and you're struggling to clear waves, it's not exactly easy. So that's a huge problem that Annie has that I think not many people talk about. And then I would say, number two, the high auto attack range of Annie is actually very important to a kit. But it's not really able to be utilized that effectively in the lower elo brackets, because in order to utilize the high auto attack range, you've got to have good spacing and tethering. It's not a simple part of the game to guys utilize. So I think that Annie is still very good for teaching, I guess, the basics and the fundamentals of just like, wave management and, I guess resets and warding and leaning and everything. But I don't think it's nearly as simple as people give it credit for. And I think champs like Malzahar are way simpler. And the thing for me, it's like, where does Annie fit in? If Malzahar is the training wheels of kind of mid, then what is Annie? It's like, well, you're just like you're like a harder version of the training wheels. I don't really. Yeah. I've always struggled to kind of be like, if there's someone in Iron and they say, what should I play? I actually don't really recommend Annie as much to those players than I would comparatively like a Malzahar or even a Lux for that matter. So, what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I actually pretty much 100% agree with you. I think there is actually, like, because she's so simple, there's almost like more skill in the sense of like getting what skill does exist out of that kit, right? And some things I've noticed, like of the high elo Annies, two things. One, they actually use their bear really well, for like tanking skill shots and like moving it back to heal and just like microing it in general, which is like not very easy. And I think also like one thing, especially in like the higher elos, is that using that E movement speed in order to trade, like you mentioned with the auto range and dodge skill shots and stuff, is difficult. So yeah, I think you're right. I wouldn't recommend Annie that highly to newer players. I mean, if you enjoy her, sure, but I agree. I don't think she's any longer the like peak noob champ to learn.
Yeah, Yeah, I'm glad that you see it that way as well. I think a lot of people misinterpret that because, and I think it's ingrained in the league culture.
Yeah,
Annie
pretty
is the
much.
basic
It is
champion, and
just a meme at this point. Yeah.
it's a meme, but it's just not true. And like, we versed high level Annie players before. There's some Annie OTBs on our server, and it's not simple at all. Not simple at
Yeah.
all. All right, moving on. Anivia.
Ooh, okay. So I don't rate Anivia that highly, and the main reason for that is I think that even though Anivia is a champ that like does test some of your fundamentals, I think it's a combination of again quite forgiving. So like eventually, even if you don't pressure your lane as Anivia, you will just get to the point where you can AoE wave clear and not interact at all. Whereas I think some of the champs, even like Malz, honestly have more interaction than Anivia. And also I think Anivia is very unique, and so like you can be quite a skilled Anivia and like have your rank kind of like increased by that while also just not being that good at mid, right? Like there's not many champs that play or combo in the same way as Anivia. Like if we think of other mages, I would expect someone that plays Ori or Syndra or Viktor or whatever to be able to pick up another one of those champs. But I think Anivia one tricks don't really have that many transferable skills to other champs, and are generally just Anivia one trick. So for me, should probably be like in the B tier, maybe like high B. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I think you're spot on in terms of the kit is actually quite unique, and you're absolutely spot on in the sense that if you get very, very good at Anivia, not to say you learn nothing, but the skill set you develop is quite unique. And what I notice is that you get used to just taking these very kind of, I guess, no counterplay trades in the lane, and you start to snowball, and then you don't interact with the enemy because you're just constantly clearing waves, and it's just very, very it's almost like it's a mini game champion. It's like
Yeah,
you're like kind of
sure.
completing these mini games that are very unique to the champ. So look, I think I actually have it in we have it in the MLA program, and the reason we have it there is because I think it can simplify the journey a little bit
Right.
in this, and like, yes, it's not going to teach you everything, but if you enjoy the champion, I think it's okay to get your head around some stuff. But I think something that I tend to warn some Anivia players is that if you when you do expand your champ pool, you are going to go backwards a bit. So as long as you're
Yeah.
okay with that, you wrap your head around that, it's okay. It's not like a champ where it's like just don't play it, but it's just be careful. You're not going to learn
Yeah.
everything. So yeah, I agree with you. B tier for sure. I mean, let's just take Kassadin's right there. Let's tackle Kassadin.
Yeah, so I don't have too much to say about Kassadin. I think he would be pretty low on my list. I think that his playstyle is very unique, not just in terms of like champion, right? Like there's a lot of things you have to learn about like flanking and side laning and stuff that is very unique to Kassadin because of his mobility. But I also just think that like AFK lane and kind of play, he's not quite the same extreme of like playing for 16 that he used to be, but there's just not many champs that play like this, and I don't think it's a great way for learning the game either. So I'd definitely just put him in C tier. I wouldn't recommend him.
Believe it or not, this is going to sound ridiculous. I actually
Okay.
experimented with Kassadin in the program.
Oh, really? Okay.
And it was a disaster. It was not a good idea.
Yeah.
And one thing, okay, so the reason why I kind of went down that rabbit hole to test it is because I thought that because the champion had very clear reference points, like, when you play Kassadin, it's like, you know exactly what you want to do. It's like, okay, I want to minimize this levels 1 to 6. I want to try and get towards my roller. But, it's like you have this, like, it's borderline black and white, right? You know exactly when you're strong. You know exactly when you're weak. But then, yes, even though you do have these clear reference points, the execution is a whole different beast. And then also you don't really learn, I don't really think you learn, you're a very passive laner. And when you're a passive laner that is not really getting any lane control, sure, you can learn fundamentals, but you have very little say because you have no control over the wave. So it's a very unorthodox, roundabout way to learn fundamentals. And then not to mention, there's a lot of invisible things with Kassadin. You got to know how to use Fog of War. You got to know creative, like how to use your terrain scaling to get into good positions. You got to be very patient and poised. You got to find those engage windows when the enemy have used their key CC abilities. There's like a lot of invisible things, like invisible skills, I kind of call them, that just render the champion way too complicated, way too complicated. And so it was a failure. And I learned a lot in the process of doing that, but definitely don't recommend Kassadin to people learning the game.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, Corki.
All right, so I think in the current iteration of Corki, I'd actually put him pretty high. I think when it comes to just playing a kind of simple, like, marksman mid, he's pretty solid. Like, he's still sort of a spellcaster. He's not as auto attack based as before. I wouldn't quite put him in S because I think even in his simplicity, there is some difficulty in the sense that, like, it's really important that you have like good bases on this champ, or that you like really farm a lot of camps, or you're very efficient, stuff like that. And also, I think there is, kind of just how the runes work, like trading with fleet and, abusing like E level 1 and stuff is difficult. But I do think that, like, if you want to play other kind of like mid range mage or like spellcaster ADC champs, he's great for that. And I think he is a champ that really rewards you for fundamentals. So, yeah, I don't think he quite goes as high as something like a Malzahar or even Ahri's Annie, but I think he's pretty decent. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually agree. The only reason that I haven't added him into the program is actually because he's just too volatile with changes. That's the problem with Corki. So the way I view Corki right now is that I think Riot are a little bit confused with Corki. I don't think they really know where his place is. Think about it. He went from getting reworked, like, removing his package altogether, to then wanting him to have more early game kind of strength. So then he had that iteration where everyone was taking Halo Blades, rushing Opportunity, rushing Lethality, going Emax. Then they nerfed E. They encouraged people to go Qmax now with Fleet, building Triforce, IE, kind of what he used to be. So Corki, I think, is in this very kind of weird phase where I don't think his identity is solidified. And I think, yeah, you're right. In his current iteration with the Fleet, the Qmax, he's like a kind of a classic mid-range mage. And I do think he's actually very good, and good for learning a lot of fundamentals. But he's too volatile. I'll need to see where Corki's in another few months. And if he's still where he's at, then maybe, I could look into adding him in. But for now, no.
Yeah, I like that.
Azir.
Okay, well, this is the easiest C tier of my life. I think that Azir is just way, way too difficult. And the thing is, like, when you're learning Azir, you're, for a very long time, honestly, even like hundreds of games in, you're likely to be too focused either on not even just learning your champ, but honestly, just piloting your champ. Like, it's not the sort of champ that, like, you suddenly click with and, like, now you don't need to think about anymore. Like, this champ is, like, spinning 10 plates at once just all game. It's really hard. There's a lot to manage. And I think that if you're a really high level mid laner and you've got like all these habits built up, you might find Azir not as hard as people say he is. But if you're new to the game, Azir is the last champion you should be thinking about.
Yep, I think it's pretty straightforward, very mechanically demanding. I would say reference point. Okay, so the thing with Azir, and I guess we'll get into this, is that there are champions in League that scale with game understanding. Okay, so these are typically the best champs of the game. You'd think about Talia, Twisted Fate, Azir. These are champions that can do a lot. They have a lot of options. Azir, and what makes Azir so good as a champion fundamentally is that he can side lane. He can get a lot of prio in a lot of matchups. He's hard to gank because he has mobility. He has gank up. He has CC. He can team fight front to back.
He's very overloaded.
It's a very overloaded kit. But the problem with that is that in order to utilize the kit, you need to be very good at the game and understand a lot about the game. So that's why champions like Azir are just, yes, mechanically demanding, but even just trying to juice the value out of the kit, you just got to be a good League of Legends player to really make use of the kit.
Yeah, for sure.
Akshan.
Yeah, so I don't really know for this one. The thing I don't like about Akshan is I think that Akshan has become less of an AD carry and more of like an assassin, in the sense that, like, similar to champs like Katarina and Fizz, he can break a lot of rules and just like run around the map and get kills. And I think that's like a pretty bad way to learn the game. So I'd probably have him pretty low, either as like a low B or a high C. But I think there was an iteration of Akshan, especially like when he was first released, where he actually was like pretty good for learning as just kind of like the AD carry playstyle. I do think he is like relatively simple in execution, even though he has a high skill cap, which I guess is a plus. But I really don't like the like ability to drop waves, I guess, or like just run around the map and get kills. I think that cheapens a lot of it, and also it gives you a really bad like feedback loop. I think not very consistent, right? Like as a different champ, maybe you like get priority, you move with your jungler, you 4-man bot, and it's like, okay, it's very replicable, it's very easy to see why it worked. Akshan, I swear, it's like you kind of have to coin flip. You run down the river, and it's like, okay, sometimes you get a kill, sometimes you don't, and I don't think it's that helpful for even teaching you roaming. I honestly don't think it's that helpful.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I think the challenge with Akshan is that there are many ways to interpret the champion. So I actually coach at the. I've been coaching a challenger Akshan player
Okay.
for actually a long time, and he plays Akshan in his own way. And what I've noticed watching other Akshan players is that you get Akshan players that are very roam heavy, that don't value farm, that run around the map, and they're entirely focused on just like snowballing sides and playing
Yeah.
like that. You'll get Akshan players that want to sit there, be super conservative, farm 10 CS per minute, get to 2-3 items, and be a side laning menace and just, scale out of control. The problem with Akshan is that I don't think his identity is clear enough. I think his execution is also quite hard. You're a mid to low, very like low range champion.
That's true.
You need a real like the ease not intuitive. I don't think. I think it's actually not easy to use, and the whole stealth factor of the champion gives it an incredibly high skill cap. It's kind of got that. It's kind of got that. I guess concept that we are talking before about Azir. It's a very, very overload. There's a lot going on in the kit. There's a lot you can do with the kit. And in order to really juice the value out of the kit, there's a lot you need to understand. You need to understand like creating man advantages. You need to understand stealth, fog of war. You need to understand getting your reset. There's just a lot jam packed in that kit. So I think you're right. It's definitely high end C, but I think the kit is actually it can not always, but it can promote bad habits, but also even mechanically just too complex in my opinion.
Yeah. Okay.
There's a lot going on there. Galio.
Okay, this one I think is pretty high. I want to maybe even say it's S tier or potentially high A. I'm not quite sure. I think that Galio, when it comes to just like learning a melee roaming champ, is one of the best. Like I think it plays by the rules in a lot of ways while also still teaching you kind of about the concept of tempo cheating, right? It has the global in the same way that like TF or Talia does. And I think that while there is the potential maybe to like run around the map, like Predator Galio with Ghost used to do and just like fight everything, I think it is just like solid enough as a champ that you can kind of, yeah, you look to set up ganks, take skirmishes, push waves and stuff like that. And he is simple enough that it will allow you to think about, okay, like how do I want to use my prior? Like where do I want to place my wards? And how do I want to like neutralize this melee versus range lane, for example? So I think if you want to learn kind of like the melee or even just like the roaming play style in general, I would say Galio is one of the best.
Yep, I think you're spot on. I don't want to go too much further than that. I think very good kit. Even if you make a few mistakes, you can always provide value with your utility. I think it teaches it teaches how to play with priority, how to play with your jungler. It teaches you how to think about even the basics of win conditions. Think about playing around strong members. It teaches you a lot about skirmishing. And funnily enough, Galio is a champion in my program that is just really underpicked. I don't know why. People just don't play it. It's just not a popular champion for some reason. But I think it's an amazing champion. So, yep, I totally agree with you. Cassiopeia.
Yeah, I probably want to say like a hot like C tier probably. Like I don't know, the champ is not quite as hard I think in terms of like the skill floor as people think, but also think it adds a lot of elements of like short range kiting. There's actually like pretty advanced itemization with this champ. The way she plays lane is very different from most other range champs. So I think that even though the champ itself is not bad, I think it's just like so many playstyle things that will mean that either you have a hard time adapting to any other range champ or that just like none of the range champs you've played before will have really like prepared you for it. So you could maybe put her in B. Yeah, actually I'd maybe put her low B. Like I don't think she quite deserves to be as low as everything else, but it definitely wouldn't be my first pick to recommend to people. I don't know. What do you think? Because I know you play her as well.
Yeah, I mean we're both old school Casio players, right?
The classics.
So I think we're biased here. I think it's really very unique and hard. I think the champion there's a lot of invisible things that we do when we play Cassio Shock that you don't even realize. For example, like you're like spacing and tethering. Like you have to be so good mechanically to make this champ work into high range champions. You have to bait out a lot of skill shots. You have to utilize your Q movement speed. You have to like, it's kind of like got that effect with Annie, right? It's like Annie, right?
Yeah,
Where
yeah.
you're low range, you got to utilize your movement speed. You got to bait out abilities. But then at least Annie has more reliable damage than Cassio. What happened to my camera there? And so I think Cassio is one of the champions that just really, really struggles into anything that's higher range than that. And to make up that difference, you have to mechanically make up for it.
Yeah, that is true.
And so when we play with Cassio, it's like, yeah, we can play into a Syndra because you just bait out the QEs and all this stuff. But that's like really advanced. And I think, again, the low wave clear.
That is true, yeah. Low wave clear sucks.
And lack of gap closer. At least Annie has a gap closer with the E. At least some sort of a gap closer. Cassio has nothing. So you're completely tied to landing your Q movement speed or making them mistether, landing your W or getting a surprise R. It's just not reliable. So I think that the champ is actually really harder than we think it is, actually.
Probably, yeah. Maybe we've just played too long.
Yeah, I think so. All right, Fizz.
Okay, I'm polarized on Fizz. Like, part of me thinks that like he is an easy to play assassin, and so it can be good for learning all those sorts of champs like, you know, a Sylas or a Diana or something like that. But the thing I don't like about Fizz is I think his stats are actually tuned so highly that like it's less about punishing and more about just like getting in range. You know what I mean? Like, for example, other assassins, they might wait for a key cooldown to be used. So the one you used as an example before was like Syndra E against Cassio or whatever, right? But I feel like Fizz, in a lot of matchups, is just like, well, you get in range of someone and then you win the trade. And I think in high reload, Fizz is actually quite hard because people will tether and play that range very well. But I actually think in low reloads, you're going to find that people just kind of, not melee range you, but, you know, just don't play their range well enough. Fizz just queues on them and gets super free trades. So I'd probably put Fizz in B, I think. I think there are other assassins that would teach you the assassin playstyle better. But I also don't think Fizz is a bad choice. I think I might just be a little biased against him. I'm not really sure.
Let's talk about this because I kind of disagree, but I could be wrong. I think, so very simply put, Fizz's kit is unique. And the reason it's unique is because all of your damage, or your wave clear ability is your trading ability.
Yes, that's true.
And you have no range. If you think about every other assassin, Akali has range with Q. Diana has range with Q. You think of Ekko, range with Q, ZQ.
Yeah.
All of these other assassins, they have some sort of range ability to farm with. Fizz's only way to farm is either auto-attacking or using your E or something like that, right? And that's your trading ability. So fundamentally, Fizz's kit is so hard because it's like, well, what do I do? If I use my E on the wave, then like I can't trade.
Yeah. Okay.
So Fizz is one of those kits where it's like, you're right, it's all about getting in range, but teaching that is very, very, very hard because it's like, it's a lot of intuition. It's like, okay, you gotta like, you know, make the misstep, get into Q, you gotta bait out an ability, E over it, and there's just a lot going on. It's just again, it's a mini game champion. It's fundamentally a mini game champion. And I think, yes, if you get good at Fizz, I think it can translate into, you know, if you were to play something like a Kassadin or an Akali or whatever, sure. But I think it's a really, really inefficient, suboptimal way to learn those skills. Like, why not just play one of those other assassins and not have to go through all those hula hoops of like winning the mini game? So I think yes, and remember this tier list, right? It's about learning. It's about improvement. That's not effectiveness. I think Fizz is very effective for winning games and getting ahead, but I don't think it's good for teaching the game. That's kind of where I'm at.
Yeah. No, I think I agree. I like the point you brought up about like being unable to farm from range, because you're right. That does add an element of difficulty that is like not just champion based, but just like now you have to learn like how do you do you sack HP to get it? Do you bait out cooldowns when you go to CS or whatever? It does add another layer of difficulty.
Yeah, I personally would put it high C. We can maybe come back to that.
Yeah, no, I'm down for it. Yeah.
Yasuo, I mean,
C tier. It's too hard.
Just unique. It's mini game champion in the sense that it's just so unique. I mean, think about it. Your mobility is tied to dashing in on minions. You're incentivized to dash because you want to build up your flow, right? But that's going to ruin the wave. It's just a mess. It's a very messy. So okay, I had this like little article I wrote a while ago about what dictates the complexity of a kit, and one of the factors I believe is ability to separate the fundamentals, right? And so this ties beautifully into the Fizz conversation. You think about champs like Yasuo and Fizz. In order for them to take good quality trades, they need to ruin the wave. Now, champions that can separate that their trading isn't directly tied to touching the wave, are typically better for teaching and have less complicated kits. And so that's why, you know, you would take something like I don't know, like we've got here so far, like I guess an Annie. You don't need, none of your trading is specifically tied to AoE. You could like simply walk up E, auto Q, or Q auto, whatever, proc electro, run away. And that's like way simpler and more intuitive. Whereas like Yasuo, it's like, well, okay, I want the wave kind of on my side, but in order to get the wave on my side, I got to be respectful and stuff like that. Then I got to E through the wave to trade, but then that might ruin the wave. It's a mess. So they're joined together. Do you kind of see where I'm coming from?
Yeah, no, I agree. I think that, yeah, having the added element of like, well, I can ruin my wave state, or maybe I shouldn't trade to keep my wave state. That's definitely difficult. On top of, you know, the mechanical difficulty of the champ, the uniqueness as well. Definitely not a champ I'd recommend for newer players.
Yep, Akali.
So another one that I'm very polarized on. I think when I rated Akali in the past, I had her as one of the higher tier, just in terms of learning the assassins. I think Akali is the most fundamental based assassin. Now, I think the problem is there is a lot of like skill floor difficulty to Akali. Like this champ is not easy to farm on. Her combos are not particularly easy. She provides no utility. You know, it's not like she has the same sort of like gank setup in the way that like a Diana or a Fizz might have. You need to side lane, you need to flank. So I think like it's a great champ where if you're just trying to learn the fundamentals, like you already understand the game a little bit, and maybe you're already in something like Platinum and you're trying to push your assassin gameplay higher, I think Akali could be a really great champ for that. But I think if you're very new to the game and you're kind of choosing an assassin to learn with, I definitely would not start with Akali. So for me, it'd probably be, depending on what you value, I think it'd be in C or B. But I could also see as you get higher rank, she could potentially become S in a way, you know, like if someone is, say, I don't know, pushing those higher ranks, let's say they're Emerald or even Diamond, like you're going to be wanting to play Akali.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. Because yeah, when you think of Akali, it is a pretty archetypal assassin, right? You got burst, you got mobility, you know, you tick every box, right, for an assassin. The problem with Akali is just the execution. It's just there's a lot going on. And I think, again, Akali is one of those things where for an experienced player, I think we just take for granted. For example, utilizing the W movement speed. For example, utilizing fleet properly if you go fleet on her to kind of close the gap. For example, knowing when to E backwards to take the short trade versus hold E. You know, really having a freed up mental stack so you can identify, you know, whose CC is being used. Has that person used their CC or not? There's like a lot of things, I guess, running in the background that I think Akali needs to learn, or you need to have developed those skills to have success with her. And again, why I've always been so on the fence with Akali is the bad wave clear. Yeah. Because you're a champion that needs to side lane, but you have poor wave clear. And I just think that champion assassins that have poor wave clear are just really hard. Like, I think
they are.
And you have to, in order to account for that, or I guess make up for that, you have to use offense as defense. So, for example, with Akali, let's say you're versing a Malzahar. If you just sit behind the wave and don't interact, you're just gonna be sitting there catching waves on your tail. So, in order to combat that, what do you have to do? You have to posture up aggressively. You have to get in their face, make them use abilities on you. And that's just not intuitive. I just don't think that's an intuitive thing to kind of teach. So that's why, my argument is that Ekko is actually the ultimate assassin to learn the game. Okay. And that's the assassin I recommend people, because Ekko, it has the archetypal assassin qualities. You have mobility, you have burst damage, you know, you have all those things. You could use Fog of War well. You could side lane really well, but you have the added bonus of also being able to get towers. But most importantly, you have wave clear. And so it actually simplifies the hell out of the entire assassin journey. And so I think that, I mean, even while we're talking about this, while we're talking about assassins, we can find it. Can't even find a Naafiri. So I think that's why I think Naafiri is also very, very good for assassins players wanting to learn assassins, because they have wave clear, they can side lane, they have mobility, they tick all those boxes. So just from a sheer improvement perspective, we're talking, let's say, plat below. I would put Akali quite low down here, but as you get higher, I agree. If you're like a plat plus player, you're a plat emerald plus, then I think it literally swaps. It's like
it goes higher and higher. Yeah,
Ekko goes down, Naafiri goes down, Ekko goes up. Sorry, Akali goes up. So you kind of have this kind of weird dynamic, but just kind of.
Yeah, no, I think I mean, just quickly talking about the Naafiri and Ekko things, I think I pretty much agree with that, as well as their placings. I think for me, the only thing is, well, I pretty much 100% agree with Naafiri. I'd maybe put Ekko a little lower. I don't know. I guess like we have slightly differing opinions on this, but for me, I don't like having forgiveness, because I feel like it allows you to get away with mistakes and be less punished for them. And so the reason I think that's kind of, with the R. The reason I think that is important is because I think that, like, if you're a very good player, right, you understand, like, if you go in and you make a mistake, even if you don't die for it, you understand it's a mistake and you'll know how to fix it, right? Whereas I feel like for some of the lower elo players, it's like, you know, you can go and you might make a big error and you ult away, and like you can see it as like that is just a part of Ekko's kit, right? Like you should be playing more aggressive, and that all makes sense. But then I think it comes to, you know, maybe you don't understand that, like, well, perhaps you shouldn't have gone in when they had all their cooldowns up or something, you know, and you were able to get away with it because you were Ekko, but another assassin you shouldn't. I definitely agree though. I would maybe still put Ekko in S. Like I think it should be pretty high. But I like Naafiri better as well.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually a really good point. Naafiri has that kind of less forgiving aspect, right?
Yeah, you have to commit. Yeah,
you're gonna die if you mess up that angle. You go in and you die. It's very clear. It's like, all right, that wasn't the play.
What do you think of Diana then? Because I think Diana is kind of another champ that's sort of in the like assassin archetype, as like a simpler assassin that can farm from range, does have to fully commit. What do you think?
Yeah, this is going to open a can of worms. So Diana was a massive thorn in my side. So I'll kind of give you the history here. It's interesting. So when I first made the MLA, it's been about a year and a half now for the below plat. I thought Diana was it. I was thinking, great, right? Simple, you know, you've got clear damage, you've got wave clear, you know, burst, whatever. I just really struggled to teach this champion, and people struggled to get results with it. And I never understood why. And one day it clicked. I'm like, why are people getting results with all these other champs and not Diana? And Diana is deceivingly complicated, because again, tying back to skirmishing, you're an extremely unforgiving champion. If you go in the wrong time, you don't get maybe multiple people with your art, you go in too early, you go in too late, whatever, you can be completely useless. Now you may say, well, but what about Naafiri? Well, the main difference, remember, Naafiri has actually proper mobility. You have the R movement speed, you have the E to get over terrain, you've got the W, which is an added gap closer. Like, you have all this inbuilt mobility and things that allow you to act as an assassin. Diana's mobility is actually really shit, because it's tied to, you have to click onto someone. You don't have terrain scaling. And I just found skirmishing and just, again, translating those leads very, 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 very hard. So I actually, if you would have asked me this question let's say 6 to 12 months ago, I would have put her up here. Now, answering that question, I put her, you know, probably in B. And I actually completely removed her from my program for that reason.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I think I kind of see where you're coming from. I got to say, Diana's not really a champ I've experimented with for a very long time. I used to play a lot of Diana, but like she's been changed a lot since then, and I haven't really played her. So yeah, if you want to put her in B, I think I'm down for that as well.
Okay, moving on. Let's get to A Sol.
You go first, Ray. So I'm not sure what I think about this
Yeah.
champ.
Okay. I think ASOL is okay. So ASOL has what I okay. Let's start with what I like about ASOL for learning. Clear reference points. I think it's very clear when you're strong or weak that you've got clear. You spike really well off Ryze. When you get Ryze, it's an obvious big spike. When you get your empowered R, it's like a clear indicator. It's like I can fight and I can probably win this next fight. And I think having these clear indicators help people in their journey. I think it has. I don't think it's overly difficult to execute. The only aspect of the kit that I think takes a bit of time to get your head around is the W. Once you really play around with that and you get maybe 30, 40 games under your belt and you develop that muscle memory, I think it can be a really a great, I guess, part of the kit that gives you a lot of options. And then ultimately in lower elo games, games tend to go longer, so they stall out a little bit, and you've kind of got that X factor of just being a hardcore scaler. So I think it gets a lot of results. And to be fair, I think that you also have a pretty strong early lane. Like you can stand your ground into a lot of champions. So like I think it's actually a very good champion, and I think it's just ticks a lot of boxes. So yeah, I would actually, to be honest, put it in probably S.
Okay, interesting. I'm pretty much on board with just about everything. I think for me, I really agree with the effectiveness. I think it's a very good champ. I'm not 100% sure if for me it would make it into S, just because I think the champ is, well, kind of unique, right? In the stacking mechanic, in the kind of Q DPS, and the W usage and reset. I think also something I noticed a lot when coaching ASOLs is, like you mentioned, that the lane is very strong, which it is, like with Comet, with like Absolute Focus, Scorch, that a lot of people run. It is very strong, but I see a lot of people just defaulting to the like kind of old ASOL playstyle of like just E the wave and farm it. Yeah, so I think, right about there, I think is a good spot for it. I do think, like you mentioned, the effectiveness for low elo is off the charts. Amazing champ for low elo. But I do think there is like hidden difficulty, I suppose. He's still good though. He's still very good.
Yep, I agree. Okay, I'm happy with high A for sure then. Moving on to Hwei.
Yeah, I would put Hwei in C tier. I think there's just way too many ways to mis-execute this champ, and I think even compared to other mages, he does play quite differently. Like one thing I really harp on about when I'm kind of teaching the mage champs, like the Ori, the Syndra, Viktor, or whatever, is kind of like, well, when someone goes up for a CS, you harass them, right? But the way you harass people with Hwei is very different, right? There's a couple ways. You can kind of like QE the wave and then EE them into it. You can walk up and EE them and then QW them. In some lanes you will just be like spamming QE, and then you're not sure if you should use your WE for the extra mana and push, or if you need to save WW in order to not get traded on. I just think there is a lot of difficulty in just playing the champ, that it's going to make it too hard to actually focus on learning fundamentals at the same time. I will say that like it is a very fun champion, and I think that is important on some level, right? Like if you're going to play a champ and not enjoy it and then quit the game, right, it's kind of pointless. At the same time though, I would highly encourage you to find an easier champ than Hwei.
Yep, I think you nailed it. It's a very fun champion, not the most simplified learning journey.
Yeah.
But I will say it's kind of similar to that of Azir, isn't it? Where it's got that scales with game understanding. If you're very good at the game, there's a lot you can do, but very not good for learning. Too complicated. Too many. Like you said, the trading patterns not intuitive at all.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on. Neeko.
I don't know really for Neeko. I think that she has some unique elements, right? In that you can like disguise yourself as a creep and stuff like that. But I actually don't think it's like insanely difficult. You know what I mean? And I do actually like that the way Neeko plays in lane is, well, you kind of just do play like a mage, right? You have strong lane, you have like decent wave clear and stuff like that. I guess like the biggest negative for me about Neeko is that like she has a really big transition from like the early to mid game, right? Like in the early game, she does kind of play like a mage, but then in the mid game, you kind of become this like skirmisher or diver. And it's kind of like if you combine two champs, like maybe if you played like Syndra for the early game, but then you play Lissandra in the mid game. And I think that can be really, really confusing if you're trying to learn like the one champ and then you kind of just have your play style completely switch. So I'm not totally sure where I'd put Neeko. I think it would be in B or C. I think, especially when I look at the A and S tiers, I'm like, man, like these champs are so much easier than Neeko. But I don't think Neeko is as hard as people think. It's more just it's like weird, you know, it's a very strange champion, I think.
Yeah, I think it's very unique. I think that the challenge with Neeko is less the lane and more the mid game.
Mm,
I think in lane, most people can walk up, they can land a few Qs, they can get a bit of prio, might get up a little bit of farm, and they might even, take a nice little 2v2 at level 6. But the problem with Neeko is that you're so low range when you move into mid game, and then there comes a lot of ARAMs. It's just, you got to get creative. You either got to turn into a minion, you got to be getting some sort of flank. It's just too much complexity there with actually having an impact in the mid game. So I think in order to have reliable, consistent success with Neeko, there's a lot of small, invisible concepts that you would have to learn. That I just think that it's just like, why the hell are we having to learn this to get to platinum or whatever? It's just like, no, we're just really overcomplicating the journey. So I agree. I think high C, low B, somewhere in there.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay. Still a bit of a lucky dip here. Let's get to Rumble.
Oh, okay. So Rumble, I like as like a kind of melee bruiser playstyle. I think the heat management obviously is unique, and I think there is like a fair amount of difficulty, right? Like I think you like one thing I always found interesting is that there's two types of rumbles, right? There's the ulti rumbles and then there's the QWE rumbles. And I'm definitely a QWE rumble. I think that finding consistent value with his ult is quite difficult. And like one thing you really want when you're new to the game is something very consistent, right? I do think Rumble is actually quite effective as a mid pick, but I do wonder if like having the heat management and like, you know, trading around like your empowered abilities and stuff is just a bit too hard if you're new to the game. But I'd be interested in hearing your thoughts on it because it's not a champ I really think about a whole lot.
I think from an effectiveness perspective, it's pretty good. But from a learning perspective, I think like what kit plays like Rumble?
Yeah.
Right. You have no mana. You're AoE waves. It's hard to manage waves because you got your flame spitter AoEing minions. You got to kind of walk past the wave and zone a lot of the time. You got to really manage the heat, which is, I think, again, quite mentally overwhelming. The way you fight, you got to find those angles with the R. I think to be honest, even just talking through that, it's definitely
when you put it like that, it doesn't sound very good.
It's definitely in C.
Okay.
That's the
I like
just from a learning fundamentals. Like, what do you really? You're going to learn, I guess, roaming. No.
Yeah.
LeBlanc.
I would put LeBlanc in C tier, personally. I think this is one of the champs with simultaneously a very high skill cap and also a very high skill floor. There is a lot of combos to this champ. It's difficult to farm on, and it has like multiple kind of play styles throughout the game, right? Like the way you lane is like, at least in the past, was a lot about like setting up for jungle ganks. You know, you'd play kind of like Ahri for the early game, but then you'll also become like a burst mage at some point. At the same time, you can poke. I don't know. I think overall LeBlanc is just way too confusing. And I would just recommend anyone that likes playing LeBlanc, if they're new to the game, just to try playing Ahri instead. Because I think the champs are like somewhat similar, except Ahri is 10 times more forgiving and way easier to pick up.
Yeah, that's actually really cool. I've never heard that piece of advice before, but it actually makes a lot of sense. I really like that. Yeah, I tell people if you're below Platinum 2, don't even bother. I think Platinum 2 for me is like the absolute kind of minimum you need to be Platinum 2 to have like some sort of success with the champion. And I think, you're fundamentally, I would say, a 2v2 based champion, and junglers below Platinum 2 don't really know how to play through mid. And so I think it's a lot of the time you're going to be left on an island, and I just don't think that's ideal. And like you said, the trading patterns are very unique and kind of has that Hwei effect. There's a lot of ways you can trade, and you got to posture aggressively. There's just like a lot of complicated stuff there. Lissandra.
So I would put Liss pretty high. I think Liss is probably A or potentially even S. I think Liss has one of the clearest game plans of any champ in the game, right? It is like a push and move champ. You want to 2v2, you want to dive with your team. I think it also is quite useful for helping learn the other push and move champs, right? Like I think chances are if you can play Lissandra, you could also, easily learn a champ like Ahri or potentially even a melee champ like Galio. So I think it has a ton of transferable skills and a very clear game plan. I do think actually, as you get higher elo, Lissandra can become harder to play just because people will play around you more and you'll need to use Fog of War more. You'll have more trouble in the 1v1 and stuff like that. But I think specifically for the kind of like plat below bracket we're talking about, I would probably put her in S, but I think I could definitely see depending on like, I guess, where you value or like what emphasis you put on which forms of difficulty there is in the kit, like needing to flank or needing to choose your engages, I could see it going lower. I could see it as low as B, but I could also see it as high as S.
Yeah, wow. I didn't see that coming. I think Lissandra has a lot of challenges because you're so low range. And so there's a few things that scare me about Lissandra. Number one, you're not an amazing 1v1 isolated laner.
Yeah.
So if you're versing something like anything that's higher range than Lissandra, you're gonna struggle. It's not easy. You're gonna get cut, you're gonna get tethered, you're gonna get spaced, and landing like the Q through the minions is not easy at all, I don't think. It's not hard, but I wouldn't say it's easy, especially into higher range champions. Number two, what I've found is that games are less played around mid in the lower levels. Junglers tend to play to sides a lot more, and I think the champion fundamentally again thrives when the junglers play around you, or you can play around the jungler, and it's like a much more 2v2 centric game. And I'm worried that in a lot of games, you're going to be stuck in this isolated 1v1. You're going to be getting like, well, I can do something, come mid, but like, they're not going to happen. And then I would say, because of that, poor isolated 1v1 laning and everything, you're not really, it's just like, you're just not really going to be able to fulfill the champ's identity. And so I think that if you can get through that levels 1 to 9 and you get to the point where you just kind of one-shot waves and move, I could see it teaching a lot. I could see it teaching a lot about kind of target selection and playing with your team and playing around neutrals, and I could see that. So I think for me, when I think of the champ, I think it's great for teaching. I could see it being really good for teaching mid-game, and I could see it great for that. I don't see it as a great champ for learning the actual lane fundamentals. Like, okay. I don't think you are going to get a lot of like teaching trading on Lissandra. I think it would be hard.
Yes, I think I agree with that. Yeah,
I think teaching a lot of that like stuff with wave manager as well won't exactly be super easy because you're not going to have control over a lot of lanes, I think. And I think Lissandra is one of the champions that high elo players are influenced by are a little bit biased because I think higher level players are better at understanding how to minimize the weaknesses when playing a lower rank champion. That's, I think, something we know how to do quite intuitively. So I would say she, for me, would be I would say high B.
Okay.
I think it's somewhere here to here for me personally. So yeah, I don't know. I've always been on the fence about Lissandra. I've been so close to adding her into the program many times. Again, her inability to like win, like you lose to everything, right? Basically, like you think about Lissandra, it's never like, oh wow, this is a great like Lissandra lane. You basically legit lose like every 1v1 matchup, maybe albeit a few in the game. So like it just feels weird to have a champ that's so 2v2 dependent in lower elo. So that's why I think it's either here or here.
Yeah. Okay, I mean, I'm kind of down with the placement. I guess the one thing I would quickly say is that I feel like most of the champs that do really hard punish Lissandra in the 1v1 are quite difficult to play. I think, stuff like Syndra and Ori are quite hard, but I wouldn't really expect someone in Platinum to be like punishing you in the way that it kind of becomes like, oh, I just like can't play this game 1v1. So I'd see it as like with your wave clear, you should be able to neutralize 1v1 and get to the mid game. But you're right, like it has the potential to be really bad. Like if someone does abuse you and you don't get help, then like you are just kind of out of luck. But I guess like that would be my counteract to it. But I think you're right. I think high B, low A is like a fair enough place for it.
The last thing I'll say about Lissandra is, there are going to be quite a few games with Lissandra where it's like you just don't do anything. Like you actually just can't win the game because maybe your comp's lacking damage and you're versing some tankier champions. And like the thing I like about some of these other champs is that I feel like you have a lot more options. So I think like the journey becomes a lot more pleasant. We're talking about fun. You're talking about like the fun aspect.
Yeah.
Like I don't think Lissandra is an overly satisfying journey from a mid laner's perspective. But let's see a bit low A. There's definitely something I want to explore.
Maybe we come back to it. Yeah.
Katarina.
So I'm a Katarina hater. I think that the champ is very unique and I hate the playstyle. I hate the coin flip roam playstyle. pretty much in the same way that I don't like Akshan and stuff like that. And I also think Katarina is not even similar to other assassins either. So I think if you're learning Katarina, it's specifically to be a Katarina one trick. I don't think it has any transferable skills at all, pretty much.
Yep. I think nothing else to be said. You're spot on. Just like a Yasuo 2.0.
Yeah, pretty much.
Too unique. Orianna.
So Ori is it's the, for me, for a long time, Ori was like the easiest S tier in the world. And the reason for that is because I think Orianna, of perhaps any champ in the game, is like the most fundamentally rewarding, right? Like if you're a good mid laner, even if you don't know how to play Ori, you will be good at Ori, just because she is pretty much less than playing the champ. You are almost just playing mid, is kind of the way I see it. And so in that sense, in terms of like punishing you for making your mistakes and really like rewarding you for learning the fundamentals, I think she's one of the best. I do think Ori is harder than people think though. And like, especially when I look at the rest of that S tier, I see the kind of the low skill requirement or maybe barrier to entry of like, Malz, Galio, etc. And I'm like, well, Ori is a lot harder to pick up than these champs. So I think Ori is somewhere in A. I'm not sure where I would put her. I do think it's again another champ that if you're starting to get better at mid, you have some habits built, you don't have to think as much. I think she is just going to be the easiest slam dunk S tier of your life. But I think if you're level 30, just getting into ranked, you're probably going to have a hard time. And I would probably go for something else first.
Yeah, I don't recommend Orianna for iron players, even low bronze. I think it's more of a high bronze, low silver type champion. And I agree. I think she teaches the fundamentals beautifully, but I think the mechanic of the bowl is not
that does
intuitive.
trip people up. Yeah,
it takes a lot of time. It's a lot of muscle memory that needs to be developed there. So I think it's great for learning fundamentals, but it's just there's a lot of work that needs to be put in for you to even get to that point where you can learn the fundamentals, because there's so much muscle memory that needs to be developed. So I would say I'd put it somewhere in here.
Yeah, I'd maybe even put it a tiny bit lower. I don't know what you think, but
yeah, I agree. Somewhere around here. I mean, yeah. Okay, Irelia.
Another C tier for me. I think this champ is insanely hard. I do think Irelia actually does have transferable skills though. Like chances are, if you can play Irelia, there will be other champs you can play. But I feel like for mid lane, there's not many champs like Irelia. When I think of champs that play somewhat similarly to Irelia, I'm thinking like Camille, Jax, potentially Fiora, all the top laners. So it is a awesome champ. I love playing Irelia. I'm also awful at playing Irelia. It's really hard. Really, I would stay away from it. But potentially, if you wanted to carve out a melee pool for yourself, I could see it. But it's like you said, Yasuo 3.0 this time.
Yeah, it's so hard. Aurelia is so hard. Like again, fundamentally, the whole idea of having to pull waves and then, but you need to keep up your stacks, your passive stacks, and you need to trim minions to create the bridge. You get the reset, and it's just a lot going on. And you're like brutally unforgiving, and your mobility is tied to minions. It's just a mess, right? Yeah. So yeah, very low C for me. All right. Let's get some more stock standard, like a Syndra. Let's talk about. Oops, that's not.
That's
Syndra.
a funny looking Syndra.
Syndra here.
Yeah.
Where's Syndra for you?
I think Syndra has been made a lot easier than she used to be. I think old Syndra was very difficult, and I think this Syndra is still hard. But she is kind of like, she has the ability to teach you things while also still being somewhat forgiving, right? Like before, Syndra was amazing in lane, could like punish non-stop and, but you kind of had to snowball, right? Like, or at least had to be even. Whereas I think now you actually can fall behind a Syndra and it can still be fine. Like you have the ability to punish the lane. Even if you don't though, you will scale. And obviously it's better if you hit more skill shots, but you have a slow on your E, when you get it upgraded, which is pretty nice. For me, I still wouldn't put Syndra, I'd probably put her in like a low A or maybe a high B. I think there is some difficulties of you are quite skill shot reliant, which is like a lot of difficulty. And the champ does have a lot of mechanics to her, like, making sure you have an extra ball on the ground or, holding a ball in your hand, like to get the bigger ulti and stuff like that. So I think there's more mechanics to Syndra than people realize. But I think she's one of the best champs, again, like Ori, for teaching you fundamentals. And that, like, if you waste your E, you'll get punished for it. You might learn that you need to hold your E, or you might, realize that, okay, like learning trading on this champ is probably one of the best because you almost never run out of mana. You have low cooldowns. It's easy to harass. So I think either low A, high B, somewhere in here is pretty solid. I actually think, yeah, a lot easier to play and learn now than she used to be.
Yeah, I agree with you for the most part, but I think that she is easier than Ori for sure.
Really? Okay.
And the reason being is because you have self peel, reliable self peel with your E, and the fact that you like that's what fundamentally makes Syndra just like a way more well-rounded champion because you have anti-dive capabilities. Like if you think of when you play Orianna into some sort of an assassin, there's absolutely nothing you can do really outside of just using your ultimate for PL and I guess the movement speed. But Syndra has like a very clear, it's like, okay, I'm versing something that can kill me. I can hold that E. And so I think it's really good for teaching you how to deal with threat. And it really teaches that aspect of like, oh, I need to be very intentional with my abilities.
Yeah, so I could see that.
So for like learning intentionality and learning trading, developing good threat, I literally think it's like the queen of fundamentals, really. The only thing that holds, like I would argue that it's even up here, to be honest.
Really? Okay.
The only thing that would make it maybe more so in here for me is because, again, there's a lot of underlying muscle memory that needs to be developed. And you know how you were mentioning all those small things, right? With like having the extra ball on the ground. I just think that stuff's not important, though, to have success with Syndra. Like I think that...
Maybe it is like the cherry on top sort of thing.
Yeah, it's kind of like the cherry on top. Like I feel like if you just know how to time your Qs with last hits, you know how to like do the basic combos of like maybe W first, get the slow, then follow it with the QE. Like I think you've got the clarity of reference with getting to 40 stacks, like holding your E reactively into high threat. Like I think there's like if you kind of get your head around those ideas, you can really pop off. And what's really been, I would say one thing that's caught me off guard with Syndra is that I've had many people, even in bronze, get great results with this champion, which suggests to me that I was missing something. This champ is actually way more forgiving than I thought it was.
Yeah, I agree.
So just from the sheer results people get with the champion in my program, I would even argue that it's even probably the high A. Okay, so yeah, I would say it's somewhere around here for me personally.
Yeah, I'm down to put it there. I think, yeah, I mean, I guess it just depends what we're valuing higher, you know. I don't know. I like it there. I think
for teaching,
I like the points.
Okay, so like again, teaching the game, I think it's very, very, very good. I think we're both aligned that it's not exactly easy, and there's a lot of underlying muscle memory that needs to be developed. So somewhere around here, I would say.
Yeah, I agree. Somewhere.
You happy with that?
Yep, I like it.
Okay. Talon.
I don't really know for Talon. I think Talon's like kind of a weird champ. Like he is pretty unique. But I think he does have the potential to play the game more by the rules. You know, like he doesn't have to dip from waves and just like run bot because he actually can clear the wave. Like he has good wave clearance stuff. I think he is like quite unique though when it comes to assassins, just in terms of like the terrain is super weird and like the way he trades as well is like very different, I think, from other assassins. So I don't know. I don't play a whole lot of Talon. I would probably put him in B, I think. I don't know. I don't think he quite deserves to be down in C, but it wouldn't be the first champ I'd go to recommend people either.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's an interesting one because I think it can teach a lot of good assassin fundamentals. You theoretically do have wave clear. The thing that scares me with Talon is just the way you get your damage off is not... It's very weird, isn't it? Like you think of a lot of the other assassins, their damage is more straight up. It's more like very clear where your damage is coming from. But with Talon, you really got to be trying to proc the passive. And I think there's a lot of complexity, a lot of small details with Talon that are really needed. So yeah, I would say it's somewhere in B, low B.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, Veigar.
Ooh, so Veigar, I mean, the really nice thing about him is, I think, very, very simple to play and execute game plan. The only thing I worry about is I feel like there are a lot of fundamentals that you can't teach with this champ, right? Like, I feel like he is a very good, like, scaler. He's a very good neutralizer and team fighter. But, like, if I were trying to teach someone, like, wave control and, like, you know, trading and stuff like that, I feel like you're just being capable of it as Veigar, because, like, most of the time you don't have control of the wave and, like, you don't have the ability to like harass on CS and stuff. So I think like for maybe like most of the fundamentals, Veigar is really good. But I think there's also just like maybe kind of similar to Lissandra, there is just like a whole like bunch of fundamentals that you just can't really work on with this champ. At least that's kind of how I see it.
I like Veigar personally, though. I think
Okay.
that I think you definitely can trade. Okay, so I think Veigar's trading in lane is better than what a lot of people give it credit for, and I think in the lower levels, people really disrespect Veigar's Q damage, and I think that if you're really intentional with your Q, you can start really putting in those
Chucking
Qs on
people
the
out.
enemy.
Yeah.
Like you can get a lot done. I think the trading is not exactly simple, but I think it teaches a lot. I mean, it teaches you, intentionality with your ability usage. It teaches you how to position properly. It teaches you good warding and leaning. I think it teaches you I guess, do have wave clear. Kind of. It's not the most wave clear, but you do.
Yeah, it scales up for sure.
Scales up. I like it. I personally think it's a high A, low S. To be honest, I
Really?
recommend.
Okay.
I really like Veigar for teach it because it simplifies the journey a lot. Because what I like about Veigar, the main thing I like about Veigar is that you have that, again, clear reference points. It's like I know what I want to do as Veigar. I want the enemy to come into me. I really want to control those choke points. I want to stack up my passive. Like, I just think this really simplifies the learning journey. And even though it may not teach everything, I think for the sake of the learning, like a lot of good immobile mage fundamentals, I think it goes a long way.
Yeah,
So,
I can see that. For what it does teach, it probably is very, very good at teaching.
It's kind of got that Malz factor where it's like, yes, it's not teaching everything, but what it does teach, it teaches in a very kind of smooth, beginner-esque way. So I actually really recommend Veigar to a lot of people in like iron and bronze and stuff like that.
Yeah, I think I'm down for that. Yeah.
Ryze. Now, I know you're a big Ryze player. You've always been a big Ryze player.
Am.
Where is Ryze for you?
I think I'd put Ryze in C, to be honest. I think that there are fundamentals that Ryze can teach you, especially about like pushing and moving and stuff like that, but it's just, you could play any other champ and have a much easier time of learning those same fundamentals. Ryze is in a really weird spot because he was like a pro play staple, and then they like kind of nerfed him out of pro play to like make him good in solo queue, but he's like not good in solo queue either. So yeah, I think he's just like he needs a rework, honestly, or maybe a revert to his old state. But
Ryze is a mess.
I don't like it. He is. He really is. He is still fun, but man, he's not in a good spot.
Ryze is just, holy moly. Like, I don't even know where to start with that champion. Like you have no mobility, you're low range. Like, you're a champ that has to like try and create man advantages. It's just so much going on there. Like, I think you're right. He needs a rework. They need to do something to him because his kit is actually really hard to balance in its current form.
Yeah, it is.
Because if they change the numbers and give him more damage, then he's just going to be a shove and move machine.
Yeah, exactly. You'll just never be able to contest him ever.
But if you leave him as he is, he can't ever fight anyone and just gets rolled. So yeah, I think I would actually argue that he's really low for me. I think he's I
think so too.
Down there. Okay. Vlad.
I honestly don't really have an opinion on Vlad. I think that there's a lot of, even though the champ itself is mechanically simple, I feel like there is a lot of difficulty, like punishing the fact that you have sustained advantage and like you really need flanks and to abuse the fact that you're resourceless and stuff like that. So that makes me think C. But I gotta be honest, I don't think Vlad's ever really a champ that I've invested a lot of time into or coached a lot of people on. So I don't feel like I have that great an opinion of him.
Yeah, okay. So really, let's break down his kit. Next to no wave clear. Next to no mobility. No CC.
Yeah, that's true.
So you lose like majority of lanes. It's just, from a learning perspective, it's garbage. Like, I think it's absolute garbage.
Okay, nice.
Because what are you learning? You have no wave control. You have no wave clear. You have no CC. You have no mobility. It's like, the way I view Vlad is, he's like kind of like, I'm going to sit here and I'm going to neutralize and minimize. The game's going to stall out. I'm going to use both my time my summoners off of one major team fight, get a triple kill, and then kind of win off a team fight. Like, that's what really your champ fundamentally is about. And it's just like a mini game champ. It's a mini game champion that does not teach fundamentals. Yeah, very simple. Qiyana.
Yeah, another one which is kind of weird. I think that Qiyana as a champ is not as hard to play as people think. I think that in terms of like most of the difficulty of Qiyana comes from managing difficult lanes, which tend to only become a problem in super high elo. I do think the thing is though, like she is just a more difficult assassin to play compared to something like Naafiri. Like I don't even think Qiyana would be that low for me if Naafiri didn't exist. It's like,
Mm.
well, maybe Qiyana's not the worst thing ever, but like, why would you learn it over Naafiri? Like, I feel like Naafiri makes it so much easier without having to have like the advanced combos. So I kind of like somewhere in B. I don't think she quite deserves to be down in C, but I'd really recommend Naafiri way higher.
Yeah, it's interesting because I like it in the sense that it has clear reference points with the R and everything. But I think
Mm,
what really makes it quite difficult is you got to utilize you got to know how to use stealth, right? You got to
that's
know how
true.
to use the grass queue, and learning how to use grass queue I think is not simple. And it's kind of got that Akali effect where it's like you got to know how to use the shroud, you got to know it with Akali, and you got to know how to use grass queue. You got to create space with it. You got to know how to kite around with it, and uh, I think that for that reason, it's just mechanically getting is just quite difficult. So yeah, I agree with you though. I think it does teach a lot of good fundamentals, but I think it's just such a complicated learning journey from a fighting perspective.
Yeah, yeah, I can see that.
Brand.
Okay, I would put Brand probably an A somewhere, I think. I think that in some sense this champ is a little cheesy, like in the way he trades. Like I feel like W or Qing the wave and then Eing off it is like a weird trading pattern that isn't that replicable to other champs. But I do think similar to something like Veigar or even Malzahar, like you have the potential just to play like a straight up front to back team fight and just like have a ton of impact. And like he is a mobile, like he is still punishable. You are gonna, if you make mistakes around like positioning or warding, like you're still gonna hurt for them. So I like Brand. I think the only downside for me is like I feel like his lane is too simplified. But I mean, yeah, he definitely deserves to be on the upper end of this tier list somewhere.
Yeah, I agree. I think he has got that kind of Malzahar effect, but and even though his trades are a little gimmicky, I think he does teach you how to play in a mobile mage. You still got to be
Yeah,
warding and leaning. You still got to have good resets. You still got to have good positioning. Even though you're going to pump out a lot of damage no matter what, I think it just still teaches a lot. So, yeah,
yeah,
I like it high. I like it high A somewhere here maybe.
yeah. I think it looks good.
Yeah, somewhere around there. Victor.
Ooh, okay. So Victor for me has always been relatively high on the list. I think that he does teach a lot of, a mobile mage mechanics. And I think that while there is a pretty high skill cap to Victor, I don't think the skill floor is like super high. There's lots of little things like canceling Q animations or, like really abusing like your movement speed and stuff like that. But I think you can just be like a solid scaling Victor pretty easily. To be honest, I think there really just isn't that much extra to say for Victor. Like he is just a solid champ. For me, it'd be like, yeah, about mid A tier. I think the only thing I don't really like about Victor is like there is difficulty in the sense that like you really compared to other mages like Syndra and Ori, you really do need to like consciously avoid skirmishes for like probably the first 10 minutes or so, unless you have everything up and they're really low or whatever. But he is quite bad at skirmishing, whereas like I feel like Ori and Syndra, for example, can skirmish at pretty much any stage of the game and be at least decent. That's the only drawback, I
Hmm.
think.
Yeah, I think with Orianna and Syndra, there's more ways to have impact in a fight, is what you're saying, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
especially
yeah.
early.
Yeah, especially with like Orianna, you can E someone, you can W someone. Like I agree. So I still like it. I think it teaches a beautiful
Yeah, me too.
fundamentals though. Right, great laning fundamentals, timing ease with last hits, getting lane control. It teaches you how to be a lane bully, really simply.
Yes, for
So
sure.
I like it. Um, Tristana.
Okay.
I'll start with this. I want to start with
Yeah,
Tristana.
you
I'll
go,
start
you
with
go.
Tristana. So Tristana has actually recently been added to my program. Now, Tristana is a
Ooh.
champ that I was not a fan of for a long time. Now, I want to make it very clear. I don't think Tristana teaches all the fundamentals very well. Obviously, wave clear is out the window, right? With your passive.
Mm-hmm.
He's also, from a threat assessment perspective, you have this W, right? Where you can jump away. The thing, though, that I've really reflected on, come to terms with Tristana, is that if you're relying on your W to jump away, you're actually not going to have success with the champion anyway, because you will just feel so useless. And the one thing I like about Tristana is that she's not forgiving. If you don't farm well, if you
Mm.
die because your lack of utility, you will feel like an absolute piece of shit very, very quickly. So even though it doesn't teach you all of the fundamentals, what it does teach you, it teaches you how to play with priority. It teaches you how to take over a lane. It teaches you how to basically be the center of the game, essentially. And it teaches you good position. It teaches you how to position. And I think it just teaches you how to play with priority. Really, that simple. You can have first move to fights. You're going to be aware of like your jungler. You know, you're going to be able to shut down your lane opponent if played well. And I think it teaches trading. And I think there are some wave management aspects of Tristana. Like when you're playing Trist, you actually have to let the wave bounce out. You don't just permanently shove waves with Tristana.
Yeah, so you can jump on them and stuff.
Yeah, so there are like little things with Tristana you learn. So I don't think she's up anywhere up here. I would argue that from a learning perspective, she's maybe even down here. But I think Tristana is like kind of like a new age mid laner where like I had a really fixed mindset with her in the sense that I was like, oh, she's just not a mid laner. But she just is. She's been here for too long. And I think that getting people's head around this sort of mid laner earlier on in their journey, it's not for everyone, but if you've got that like maybe 80 carry-oriented mindset, you like playing auto attackers, I like it. What are your thoughts?
Okay. Yeah, so I do disagree on a couple things. I will say I like the placement. Like, I think she's in a decent spot. I think the only thing I disagree with is the forgiveness. And I think that might just be the case of, like, the champ right now is quite overtuned. You know, like, the thing I don't like about Trist at the moment is how she has essentially infinite sustain. You know, like, I don't think you have to think about your laning phase and your trading so much because, like, for the most part, you do just win trades. And if you don't, you know, even if you trade negatively, you will just heal it all back up. You know what I mean? And I think that is... it can definitely become like a crutch, right? Like other champs do not have Fleet, Absorb Life, potentially like Second Wind or Bone Plating, don't have the ability to rush Vamp Scepter into Bork or whatever. So I think that might be more meta related though. I think you're right. She is more unforgiving than people think. Like if you jump in at the wrong time, you'll die. If you don't farm, you die. If you don't snowball, you know, like whether it's plates or CS or whatever, you will be useless. But I think just currently, she just has way too much going for her, but hopefully that is more of a temporary thing. And I think if you guys are watching this video in the future, most likely what Curtis said probably is true and that she's not so overtuned. But right now, I think she is disgusting.
Yeah, I think she's probably one of the best champs in the game at the moment, if played well. So yeah, I hear you. I definitely hear you. I think she's good where she is. Yeah. But I agree. I don't think she's healthy at the moment.
For sure.
Xerath.
Okay, so Xerath, I think, is probably like a high B for me. Like, I think Xerath just does a lot of the things that a lot of the mages do as well, except he has like much longer range. I think he can be like quite a bit more forgiving. So I don't really have like a whole lot to say about Xerath other than it feels like I think you would learn the fundamentals easier playing something like Syndra, Ori, or Viktor. But if you want to play Xerath, I definitely don't think it's a bad choice.
Very simply, the reason I haven't encouraged this champion or approved it in the program is because it's not okay. So if you play Xerath properly, and what I mean by that is you try to actively trade with your W, you know, you time your W with last hits and you land your skill shots and you actually play to trade and you balance that with your last hits and you tick all those boxes, then it's not bad. The problem with Xerath is that there's a lot of people that would use the champion wrong. Similar to Anivia, where it's like, you could just play to wave clear and not interact.
That is true.
And so I think from a learning perspective, I worry that people are just going to be like, all right, I'm going to lock in. It's like Ziggs. Let's just talk about Ziggs.
Just
at the same time. I'm just going to AFK and not interact. And so it's like, yes, the champ can be used in a correct way to learn some fundamentals, but I just don't think that's the way people are going to play it. And I don't think intuitively that's the way, like people are just going to think, oh, Xerath wave clear, cue the wave, not interact, and then get to like a mid-game team fight and play front to back. And it's just like, what are you really learning? Like, what are you actually learning? And so I think that if you're learning mages, you're just way, way, way better off learning like a Syndra.
Yeah, something a bit more active.
Something more active, yeah. Something that like actors encourage to, encourage to trade. So I personally would say that I think it's somewhere in here, right? I think these champs are somewhere in here.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my fear with these champs, you know.
I can see that. And I think another champ is like that actually is Lux. Like, I don't know if you've noticed that with Lux, but I feel like some Luxes are actually like psychos, you know, like they will fight you all the time. They'll be like poking you down with Comet and E and Cheap Shot and everything. Whereas some Luxes just like hit level 6 and ult every other wave and you never interact with them at all, you know?
Yeah.
I think it's the exact same as
it is the
like
same,
Xerath
actually.
and
It
Ziggs.
is.
Yeah.
The only thing though with Lux is that the wave clear is, I don't think it's as good as like a Xerath or as like
Really? I think it's better. You think it's worse?
better. I mean, with your
Well,
ult,
I
it
just
is. But
what
think about
I see
Xerath
is
Q.
just like, oh, you go.
Well, think about Xerath Q, right? Like you just Q, your Q is going to hit like every single minion. And now look, theoretically,
Yeah.
Lux's E could do the same. You could put it right in the middle, but I think it's more intuitive to poke with Lux than it is to poke with Xerath. Is my point. Like I think it's more. It makes more sense. But like, yeah, I see where you're coming from. Lux is, I mean, look, I can't deny it. Lux has that same effect, right? You can simply play to not interact and you can learn nothing. But I think if played properly, you can learn a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I just feel like I've been traumatized by Luxes so many times of like, you know, I'm punishing them really hard in lane and then they hit level 6 and like every other wave it's just like E ult and base. And like, I don't know. It is hard to say like which one is actually going to teach you more, because maybe you're right. Like maybe because of the way like Lux's passive works, where it like encourages you to like walk forward and like, you know, try and E-order your opponent or whatever. Maybe that is better for learning. But I also think there's on the other end of the spectrum, I guess, there is the exact same thing of like, well, you can just be like Anivia, like Xerath, like Ziggs, you can just sit there and clear and end up team fighting, you know?
Yeah. Okay. So comparing it with say like an Anivia, I think that the kit will kind of transfer skills to other champs more than Anivia.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Right? Would you agree with that? Like, it's like, let's say you have a Lux player that's in bronze. That person's going to have a much easier time learning, let's say, Orianna than a Anivia player would. That's what I think. So I would agree. I think it's like around here, I would say, for me personally.
Yeah.
I could easily see it as top of B as well.
I think I prefer top of B. I don't think she makes into A tier for me. I think she's just too forgiving and not as active, at least from like what I've seen.
Yeah.
But I could be wrong.
Yeah, I think it's again, like I think with a lot of these champs, it's how you use it as well. So,
yeah, for sure.
Because there are going to be Tristana players that also talk about Tristana that don't play waves properly and get away with that.
Yeah.
Whereas rather than pulling the wave out into the middle, etc. But yeah, it's a tough one. TF.
Okay, so TF is, in terms of fundamentals, probably one of the single best champs in the game. You'll definitely have a better opinion on this because you play a lot more TF than I do. I do wonder if, like, I don't know how, if people find, like, the card mechanic super difficult. You know, like, I definitely think TF is harder than people think he is. But I'm not sure if that comes from, like, champ difficulty or if it's just all, like, you know, just the playstyle. I'm not sure. I guess give your take, because I think you'd be way better.
Well, let's just break down let's talk about some fundamentals in reference to TF, right? Let's talk about trading. Trading with TF is very weird, right? Because it's like, it's very rare that you're walking up and blue carding someone because you're getting outranged. You're having to like chip them down with red cards. And you're not going to land your Q without landing some sort of CC. So a lot of the time you're encouraged to play to not interact and kind of just scale to 6. So I think trading, you don't learn anything. I think you definitely learn warding and leaning. Like, I think you can learn that sort of stuff. I think you can learn tempo quite well and stuff like that, and resets. Your kit has wave clear, which simplifies it. The problem with TF, though, is that the way your kit is fundamentally designed is all about making picks and R-ing to places and creating man advantages. And so I think that is not a great way to learn the game of, like, the role of mid. Like, let's say you imagine, like, let's just take a random player. Let's say there was a bronze player who played like TF. It's like, all right, well, you're going to wave clear a bunch, you're going to reset a bunch, and then you're going to try and ult to places. Like, how is that going to remotely translate to, like, anything here.
Yeah, I could
Like,
see that.
not that much. And I just think that TF is more of a champ that also scales with game understanding.
For sure, yeah.
So I would argue that it's like the bottom of, like, it's somewhere bottom of B to me from a learning actual like fundamentals of like as a mid laner, like holistically.
Okay. Yeah,
because I just think if you're not learning trading as a mid laner, then like
that is very important, especially nowadays.
Really, that's really not good in my opinion. So I would put it really down here somewhere, maybe. Maybe we can come back to it, but somewhere around here, at least for now. Talia, I think it's kind of got that effect of like a lot of these other champs. I mean, Talia is interesting because you have high wave clear. You're trading your low range. I just think it's quite complicated in terms of like balancing trading versus playing for the wave. You also have a pure utility-based ultimate with no damage. So it's like Ryze in that sense, right?
Yeah.
Where it's like a glorified Ryze. So what are your thoughts on it?
Well, something I've always thought, Talia, is that the champ has enough power loaded in her Q and E that I actually think you could reach Diamond without putting a point in Talia's ult or Talia's W. I seriously think you could just spam Qs and spam Es and just play like a front-to-back control DPS mage, and you would probably do pretty well. Now, obviously, you'd be missing a fair amount of the champ doing that, right? Like, you definitely want to put effort into learning those, and I think maybe that is like too overwhelming, like just having, like you said, having all those options available to you and, having lots of choices to make with the waves and stuff could make her too difficult. But I think when it comes to being like a roaming control mage, there aren't too many champs that are quite in that archetype, but you could see it as similar to something like Ahri or maybe even Lissandra, maybe like a little different in their execution, but similar sort of playstyle. I think she's pretty decent for learning that. I definitely don't think she'd be A for me, but I don't think I'd have her low B. I think for me, she'd be like middle of the pack, like just straight smack bang in the middle.
I agree. I think middle of the pack. I think what I fear with Talia is the WE combo as well.
Yeah.
It's not easy.
That is the hard part. Yeah.
And understanding how to manage the workaround and everything. So yeah, I think it's somewhere around there. But I think the champ could like be like really, really hard. I think it could be really hard for some people and quite easy for others. Like, I think she's kind of one of those clicky champions with, like, you click with that combo.
Yeah, I can see that.
So, yeah, I'm happy with middle of B for Talia.
Okay. Easy enough.
Zed.
Okay, so I think Zed for Assassins, one of the best, honestly, for learning. I think that he is forgiving enough that you're not going to feel like if you play badly that you're just going to be super useless, but also like it'll still reward you for like comboing at the right time and playing stuff. The only thing I worry about is that even though Zed has like a reasonable skill floor in order to start playing him, I feel like that kind of like, not exactly skill ceiling, but maybe like 50% effectiveness for the champ. I feel like that's actually quite high. Like it's easy to get started with Zed, but then I feel like it's quite hard to get like good at Zed. And then it's like very hard to get really good at Zed, So I think for me, he would also probably be middle of the pack. I think Zed is another one that pre-Naafiri being released, I actually had higher in the list because I think as an 80s mainly assassin, he was probably one of the best. But now it's just like, again, why not play Naafiri instead? I think it's so easy and just teaches so much more. If you want to play Zed, sure, it's fun, it's good, but I'd go to something else first.
So there's two reasons why I don't recommend Zed. The first one is very simple. It has the highest ban rate in low elo.
Oh, true.
You can't main that champion. You actually just can't because it's banned all the time. So I was contemplating picking it, and then I looked at the ban rate. I think it's banned in like 25% of games.
Oh wow, yeah, it's a lot.
So you literally can't play it. So for that reason, I put it in C tier for improvement because you literally won't be able to get it.
Interesting. Yeah.
So
I guess I kind of agree.
So you can't. That's the main problem with it. And then I would say secondly, Zed's laning phase is fine. I don't have a problem with Zed's lane. It's Zed's mid game and like the execution of fights with Zed's mid game and like triple shurikens and things like that, I think are really, really hard for average players. So like I think you can make that journey through the lower elo bracket to Zed, but it's a lot of time investment. It's a lot of muscle memory and a lot of attention to detail, in my opinion, that really needs to be crossed. So if it didn't have the ban rate, I would actually probably put it higher. way higher, maybe high
Yeah.
P or something. But
Yeah.
because of the ban rate, I put it in like legit like the bottom. Like you just can't play it.
Yeah. Okay. That's very fair. I'd never even thought about that, but yeah, I think
Yeah,
it's a good point.
I didn't think of it either until I saw it, and it's just like you can't do that. We can't have that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now Kale.
Okay. So I would put Kale just in C tier. Like for me,
Yeah.
Kale is like not really a mid laner, and I think that all her stuff is just very similar to Kassadin of like super unique playstyle. Doesn't teach you about trading or prior usage or anything. So yeah, I don't think it teaches you much about mid, if anything.
If anything, no, I agree. Nothing to be said. Teaches you know nothing really.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just a glorified Kassadin. It's not even really a mid champ. It's just I actually just hate Kale in general as like
Really?
from a design perspective. Like what like I just feel like that champ just wouldn't have been designed now. Like it feels like Ryder kind of stuck with the kit.
Yeah. I mean, I
It,
love Kale, but like I think she's kind of useless. But I love playing Kale.
it just feels like it just doesn't feel like a I don't know. It just doesn't feel like a league champ to me for some reason. I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a
Yeah.
different conversation. That's a discussion for another time.
Sure.
Silas.
Okay, Silas, I would probably put in C as well, just because I feel like there is a lot of complexity in terms, like, even though the trading and like snowballing is like reasonably easy, I think it's like, you have to know like when to play aggressive and when to not. I think you have to know like how all the ultimates and stuff work. And I could see this being a champ that, maybe if we made one for like plat to diamond or whatever, would probably actually be pretty high for me for learning like melee bruisers. But I'm just imagining, like imagine you're level 30, you just started playing mid, you lock in Silas, and like you end up with like 3 CSPM and you've just died 10 times. Like I could just see it being an absolute disaster.
Oh yeah, it's a disaster. You got to know it's a champ again that scales with game understanding. You got to know what all the champs in the game do very well. You got to know how their kits interact in skirmishes with the ultimate, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, the lane is it's you got to just find those E angles, and it's so much execution. If you miss that E2 a lot of the time, you're just
you just get killed on the way out.
not good. So lane phase,
Yeah.
I think trade like the way Silas plays lane is incredibly unique. And the kit itself is the way you skirmish is unique. And there's just like an infinite amount of possibilities. If you're moving into a team fight, it's like, well, how do I know what ultimate to take? And how do I know how that's going to influence the way I fight?
Yeah,
That's
for sure.
that's just a nightmare. So I would argue that Silas is actually really quite low for learning. Anyway.
Yeah, I think I agree.
Yone.
Okay, so this one goes a bit higher for me. I think that if you want to learn kind of like melee fighters for mid, he's probably the best. And I do think that like he is reasonably simple to play and has like kind of clear goals, I suppose. The only thing I don't like about Yon is I think that there are like a lot of things that are simplified for you. Like, for example, he doesn't have any resources. He does have like quite a lot of safety, a little lifesteal. And I think also some of the difficulty in Yon is hidden. For example, using E to like cancel certain abilities or like the ability to play really aggro on side lane and take camps. That's not the sort of thing you'll be directly punished for. You'll be punished for it later when like you're not strong enough to actually team fight. Like you just kind of walk up to a fight and you just fold, you just get killed instantly because you need to be ahead levels, you need to be ahead CS and all that sort of thing. So I think he's not bad for learning, but again, I'd probably go to something else before I went to Yon.
I actually wanted to look here. I'm looking on my other screen here what the win rate of the champion is. So in bronze, yeah, it's 49. Okay, it's actually higher than I thought. It's 49.49%. Look, I just think that this champion, like you said, has a lot of hidden difficulty. I think the lane phase is actually not that complicated, but I think the mid game is incredibly hard. And like I think what you said there, you articulated it quite nicely, where it's like you will miss things and you won't really feel like these are mistakes until later on. It's like, well, you should stat check this person or you should win this, but you're just not because you're not strong enough. And I just think that like learning the game through this lens it would just be so brutal. It would be so brutal. And I think you can learn a lot of trading fundamentals. I think you can learn a lot of like lane fundamentals, but I think the mid game is so difficult with Yone that I would argue that it's like a high C for me personally.
Interesting. Yeah.
Because I compare it to a Talon, right? I'm thinking, okay, well, both these champions have wave clear. I guess Talon has the complexity of like the terrain scaling and stuff like that. But the thing with Yone is that you need to a lot of the a big thing about Yone mid game specifically, just get specific, is stacking up your Q off camps,
Yeah, or creeps
getting
or
your
something, yeah.
Q3, and because someone needs to be basically CC'd for you to lane your damage a lot of the time, or you need to be, and so like I think there's a lot of like nuance with Yone's mid game that it's just so complicated, and fighting itself is quite complicated. And I think that at least Talon, it's more forgiving, I would say. It's like, okay, well, like let's say I go in and I maybe mess up my abilities. At least you're going to get some damage down, and I think like the reference points would be clearer. Yeah, so just my time teaching Yone, I've coached a lot of Yone over the time, and I've done a Yone guide. I played a lot of Yone as well. There's just so much noise in the mid game that just scares the shit out of me for learning the game through this lens.
Okay.
For me personally,
yeah, that's fair enough. I think again, one quick thing to say is I think he is quite effective, right? But I think you're right. Like maybe a difficult champ to learn the game through the lens of.
yeah, that's where I'm at anyway. I mean, I could be biased, but like I just have not seen. I mean, I straight up don't even I actually just quickly talking about this. I don't even recommend basically anyone to play this champion unless
Really?
you're actually gonna at all ranks, unless you're like basically gonna true trick it. So
Okay.
and the reason for that is the kit is it's a very good kit, right? It's a very, very good kit if you think of Yone's kit. But to offset that, it's kind of got that Yasuo effect where you get rewarded for having a lot of mastery. So yeah, have you seen like those curves where it's like the win rate goes up based off mastery? You are not able to tap in to the potential of the kit until you get very
until you've invested quite a lot.
Yeah. And so the problem, it's like they can't balance Yone for people with low mastery and high mastery, because if they did, it would be an overpowered champion. So the problem with Yone is that if you're going to put time into it, you got to really sink time into it. And at that point, you're like either going to be an OTP or true trick. And this is also why nowadays Yone wasn't like this back when he got released. Everyone was playing Yone. It was like a pretty staple assassin. And then people realized, holy shit, this champ is now it like got nerfed. It got nerfed like 7 times in a row. And I think Riot realized this champ should not have been accessible to the average player. This actually champion should be more viewed like a Yasuo. And as a result, like he's now got to the point where if you want to have success with him, you've got to put a lot of time into him, I think. So, yeah, that's just kind of my 2 cents from what I've
I like it. I think that's fair.
Zoe.
C tier as fuck. I think this champ is really, really, really hard. Like Zoe is the kind of champ where I'm thinking like there should be an approved list of people that can play Zoe, and there's about like 10 of them per server. Like this champ is insanely hard. I do think that like there is an element of like, well, if you get fed on this champ, it actually becomes really easy. Right? Like if you do find yourself like with a random 5 kills or something, you're gonna make a montage with it. But like this, it's a super hard champ and has a lot of skill shots, very unique as well. So I don't recommend it at all.
Yep. I think enough said. I don't want to expand on that. I think we should do Tryndamere. We're not going to do a lot of off-meta picks, but Tryndamere is quite popular, right?
Yeah. So I personally would put Tryndamere low, and I just think that's because his playstyle is so unique. I think the champ, I mean, it's nice that champ is simple, and it's nice that the champ has a simple game plan as well, like not just mechanically, but you can kind of run it down the side. But I just think like, what other mid is going to play like Tryndamere? Like the closest thing is probably like Yasuo, but like, is it even that similar? Like, I feel like not really. So I don't know. He'd be pretty low for me.
I think he's very, very unique, and like, what fundamentals are you really gonna learn with it? And imagine you get, let's say, someone climbs with Tryndamere from gold to emerald. They pick any other champion, they're going straight back to gold.
Like the transferable skills are to other weird champs like Volibear top and stuff, just like the rage splitters that like kill your base,
like whatever. It's just it's like weird. I agree. I think learning the game through that lens would be a terrible decision. Absolutely terrible. Vex. I've been a big Vex player. I played Vex quite a lot. I'll start off here. I like Vex a lot. I think he teaches a lot about his trading patterns are actually quite clear. It's like, okay, I got my empowered ability, boom, I can EQ. I think he teaches trading quite well. I think that he has clear reference points in terms of you want to get onto the squishies, you want to use Fog of War, come from different angles. I don't think he's super simple. I don't think she is super simple, but I think she does teach a lot about the game. I would argue that she's like round here, like somewhere mid A. Like, the problem with Vex, actually, what I do like about Vex is that she has that very clear learning, like what's it called, the feedback loop, where it's like I go in,
Yeah.
I can't get out. I either got the reset or I didn't. I either felt like a god or I feel completely useless. So I think Vex teaches a lot about snowballing. It teaches a lot about positioning. It teaches a lot about being like a dive-oriented kind of champion in general. So I really do like Vex.
Yeah, I don't have anything to add. I think spot on. The only other thing I'd add is I think the champ is super fun. I think that one of the best combinations of like, not only is it good for learning, but also it's just like, yeah, it's just awesome to play, especially when you're new to the game.
Yeah, I would actually even argue that it's probably even higher, to be honest. It could even be somewhere over here.
Yeah, I could see it. I could see it.
Actually, no, I would say it's above brand for
Oh
sure.
wow, you've really
I
yeah,
think,
no, I think it is. It is deserving
right?
though. I think it should be pretty high.
It's somewhere around here, I would say.
Yeah.
Okay, moving on with Swain.
Okay.
Again, I want to start this one.
Yeah, you go.
I'm a big Swain enthusiast, actually.
Enthusiast. Okay, I like that. Yeah.
I love Swain. I think Swain is very good at teaching a lot of fundamentals. I think teaches trading quite well. It forces you to really be conscious about your cooldowns. You can actually surprisingly win a lot of early lanes because your Q damage is quite high with Airy Scorch.
Yeah.
I think it has clear reference points with your R cooldown. I think and item spikes. Like you have very clear discrepancies when you're strong and weak. And I think it also what I like about it is that it has that it's quite unforgiving. Like if you go in and people get out of your R and then you lose your R, you're useless, or you go in too far, too deep, you're just going to get one shot. Like I think it teaches you a lot about skirmishing. It also teaches a lot about lane. You're in a mobile mage. You have to work on your warding and leaning and resets. A lot of the time, you're not going to take TP, so it actually really teaches resets. You're going to be quite intentional with your waves and everything. So I actually am a massive fan of Swain. It's actually one of the champs that I recommend the most in my program. So I would say it's either high A or even low S for me personally.
Yeah, I 100% agree. I would put it S. I think it belongs in S
Yeah,
for pretty much everything that you said.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, even thinking about it, I'm even thinking Vex maybe even could be S as well, to be honest.
Yeah, I was wondering that. I was thinking because she moved it up so much, I didn't want to say anything, but I think you're right. I think she is simple enough to, and good at teaching you enough that she does belong up there with the rest of them.
Oh, cool. I'm glad we're aligned on that one. Okay. Vel'Koz.
C tier all the way, I think. Another champ that you could learn mage fundamentals through Vel'Koz, but it's just making it way harder for yourself for no reason. And I think the other, even though there are some transferable skills, again, the positioning and stuff, is if you want to invest your time into learning a really difficult mage, you would probably get much more out of still learning something like a Syndra, right? I don't think Syndra is quite as hard as Vel'Koz, but for the average player, if you put 100 games into Syndra compared to 100 games into Vel'Koz, you're getting so much more out of the Syndra.
Yeah, and it kind of has that effect of the Xerath, where you can kind of just wave.
Yeah, that's true as well. Yeah.
I would just say that Xerath's damage is probably a lot easier to get off than Vel'Koz's damage, I would argue. So that's why I would probably have Xerath higher than Vel'Koz.
That's
and like
true.
you said, the kit is just quite, trading is unique. Yeah, not a fan. So yeah, I think high C.
Yep, I like it.
High C. Zilean.
Ooh, yeah. I don't really know about Zilean. The thing with Zilean that I really don't like is that his one farming ability also happens to be his only damage ability, so you pretty much have to choose between trading or farming. And I think this champ will teach you a lot about maybe who to target with your spells and your ult, and there is a lot of stuff to him, but I also think he's a very not like passive champ, but very reactive, you know? Like you do not set the pace or the control of anything. You just have to know how to respond. And I think Zillion actually is a champ that like if you're again, if you have really good fundamentals, you can probably just pick him up and play him instantly. But if you're like, you know, new to all this and you don't know the reactions, you don't know the damage estimates, you don't know people's abilities and stuff like that, you don't know how to neutralize lanes, I could see Zillion being an absolute nightmare to start learning the game with.
I mean, and think about how like non-intuitive the lane phase is, like with the
Yeah, it's
Qs. Like,
very odd.
I think it's in the depths of C.
Yeah, yeah, no, I agree.
I think it's really like I think CSing on that champion as well was like
Oh
incredibly
yeah, no,
hard.
that is hard. Yeah.
Like I would put it down here below your boy Ryze.
Oof. Yeah, that's rough, but probably justified.
Yeah. Okay, who am I missing here? I'm just trying to see.
Maybe Jace, I think, is the only one
Oh
I
yeah.
thought was like maybe a mid
Yep.
laner. Like there's, you know, we could spend all day doing the off metas, but
Yeah.
yeah.
Just doing
So
the
the only thing
basic ones.
yeah, I mean, is there real quick? Is there any down there on the list that like look like they should belong? I don't really think so.
I mean, just a quick skim. I mean,
I don't.
nah.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about like literally
Pantheon.
everything.
Pantheon for sure.
Oh yeah, okay.
Yeah, we
Let's
should do
put that one
Pantheon.
on there as well.
Let's do
Let's talk
Pantheon
about
and
him
Chase.
first. Yeah, so I think Pantheon I think is not bad. I think Pantheon's like a relatively easy to play melee AD. The only thing is like I don't know what other champs you would go to after Pantheon. You know, like if you become like let's say an Emerald Pantheon player, what do you play next? I like because I think it's stuff like Renekton maybe, but like Renekton is only like a counter pick mid, and to be honest, like he's not a great mid laner anyway. So I don't know. I guess like he is useful for learning some things, but overall, yeah, I don't know. I don't really like Pantheon for learning.
Yeah, it's interesting. So I've thought a lot about Pantheon. I think he teaches a lot of he actually teaches you a lot about trading in
Hmm.
lane, in my opinion, and he teaches you a lot about. He's very like I would say unforgiving. You go in, you mess up your ability usage, you're useless. I think he
Yeah.
also teaches roaming. I actually think it's in a way a bit of like a Galio light.
Hmm.
That's kind of the vibe I
Interesting.
get with Pantheon, and a lot of the people that play Pantheon in my program actually end up being really quite good at the game because he's actually hard. He's actually quite hard. So I would say he's like for me a mid to high B. Um,
Okay.
the reason being again, he forces you to be really intentional with your trading and your passive usage. He forces you to be very intentional with like just all of your abilities in general, and he also has very clear power troughs and power spikes. He's just hard. He's just hard from a micro perspective in terms of spacing and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So I would say that he's like on here. And you know, to answer that question, what do you play after Pantheon? I think your skill set translates beautifully to a lot of other melees.
Like
Like
melee AP, I guess.
yeah, you
Yeah.
could
Like
easily
okay.
transition into a Galio. You could transition into an Ekko. You could transition into in my even opinion, like, even like a Lissandra. Like I think a lot of low range mages you could, or even assassins you could transfer into.
Yeah. Okay. I can see
That's what I
it.
think.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Um,
I kind of like it.
Jace, on the topic of Jace, I think Jace is extremely hard.
Yeah, I agree. I think Jace might be the champ in the game that scales most with game knowledge. You know, like how you were mentioning before,
Yeah.
there's champs like Azir. I think Jace is like obviously mechanically difficult as well, but this is the champ that like it's another champ where like a pro player Jace is like next level compared to like a challenger Jace, even, you know. And so like if for the average player, you're gonna have a much easier time playing just about anything else. And I also don't think, you know, again, I don't think the feedback loop is super obvious with Jace. Like, Jace is another champ that needs to play from ahead, needs to get stuff done in lane. And, like, you might be, let's say, missing opportunities to auto attack or whatever. And you won't realize that that's a problem until you get, like, randomly killed later. And I think it's very hard as a lower elo player to evaluate why you died. Because you might look at it and be like, oh, like, maybe it's a bad matchup. Like, he just ended up killing me or whatever. But realistically, it's like, okay, well, the last 3 minutes, like you needed to get a total of 10 more autos or whatever. And that would have made the difference in that fight there. And I think that's really hard to kind of look back, especially if you don't have great understanding of the game and figure that out for yourself. And the immediate feedback loop or response that you get from making a mistake on other champs, I think is way easier to interpret and to like fix your mistakes.
Yeah, knowing when to go from range form to melee form and that whole
Yeah,
thing and
yeah,
the
the champ
trading,
difficulty. Yeah,
just clarity. Like, when you look at a champ like, again, any of these S tier champions, it's very clear about how to fight. It's like, I know exactly what I'm going to have to do here. But with Jace, it's like, okay, I go for a QE from range. It's like, but how do I know when to go hammer form? How do I know, if I should knock them away or not? It's just like so complicated in terms of your skirmishing and fighting. So trading, laning, everything's hard. And even though I think you can learn decent lane fundamentals, just like you said, it's just not a great feedback loop. And there's just going to be way too many missed opportunities. And that's going to add up and bite you in the ass. So very complicated champion for those reasons. But outside of that, I think that's basically it. So
yeah, I think I'd agree.
The whole list there. Is there any reordering that needs to be done?
Yeah, I mean, I can't really see anything that's super out of place. I think you could definitely argue for moving things like left or right, but I think ultimately, like, as long as they're in the right tier, I think like with the explanations we've given, like, hopefully you guys can, understand what we're saying and seeing where we're coming from. And I will say that obviously, like, it is subjective, right? Like, this is both of our opinions, but potentially, like, I mean, we talked about some of them, right? Some things could be higher, some things could be lower, and there is no like perfect champ, right? No. Ultimately, like, every champ will teach you something, and every champ will teach you some stuff more than others and some stuff less than others. So I don't know. Even after saying all this, I think it is important that you don't overthink your champion too much. Like, of course you should be guided, I guess, a little bit by like what we've done here. But at the same time, like, if you want to play one of these champs because you find it fun, like, fuck it, just go do it.
Yeah, 100%. And ultimately, at the end of the day, guys, is like, if one of the only reasons you play League is because you want to play, you love Akshan, then go for it, right? If that's what really gives you, all the fun and satisfaction in the world, go for it. But I would say, last thing to add on to this, if you were on the fence about wanting to play one of these champions down here that are in C tier, more often than not, if you can hold out to at least mid to high platinum, you're going to be a lot better off. And typically what I've seen is people that introduce these champions too early into their pool, they'll end up hating the champion in the long run anyway, because they'll just drive themselves mad trying to get results with them. So if you actually genuinely care about that champion, you actually should hold on if you can to high plat. But outside of that, I think we did a pretty good job. Let us know, I guess, your thoughts in the comments if you think that we misplaced anything, or if you'd like us to, we can reply to some comments, I guess, if there's some questions. Other than that, it's been awesome to do a video with you finally.
Yeah, it was fun.
It's fun. I'm sure we'll do plenty more in the future. And yeah, thanks for watching, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much, guys. We'll see you in the next one.